Kelley Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelley took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelley would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and a young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelley and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelley, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelley could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed through his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelley had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelley and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelley was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing the criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelley's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelley and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." "Tom really was suspicious that evening," said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd?" I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelley. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelley decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelley, but he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelley's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelley's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelley. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say. and for this work he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelley and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelley's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelley was supposed to be sleeping, but the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelley, trying to close his huge hands around her neck, but it wasn't that easy. Kelley began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelley had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelley's clothes while Kelley, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelley's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelley, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelley. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelley was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelley's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelley Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelley, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelley was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelley, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelley's children were given custody to Kelley's sister, Kin. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abril Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abril Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaun. Jerez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. April, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, April began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, April was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Jerez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. April was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos in the mid-1990s, as April's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998 the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Ama Cecilia. 30-year-old April was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, April gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abril was in love, and initially thought that over time they would rub along, and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time the 3rd child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Perez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, Abril stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this promotion, the family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Perez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change in scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, it changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow Abril and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, The woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied Abril, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and, as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Perez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abril's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Perez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, Abril decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. April was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, April arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, the woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport, but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old April, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. April's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and April, he He would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Anna Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed two vehicles following the car from the courthouse in which April, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that two suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle April would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on April with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting April, almost 5 years after the woman's death. The main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided.
In psychology, there is a special term called Adderley syndrome, which refers to the morbid obsession of one person with another. The affliction received its name in honor of the youngest daughter of the famous French writer, Adélie Hugo. She was a very attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love noticeably affected her mental state. As a result, the beauty simply poisoned the life of herself and her lover, who for years pursued, pretending to be his wife, then ruined his career and personal life. Unfortunately, 43 years of her 84 years, Adele spent in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. It is worth noting that the condition in which one person is overly interested in, or even obsessed with, another so much that he loses the ability to control his emotions, a fairly common phenomenon. In most cases, an experienced psychologist can help. Sometimes hospitalization and more thorough therapy are required, but sometimes such obsession borders on insanity, pushing a person to desperate, unpredictable, and extremely cruel actions. The case of Emma Ljungstig in 2008 shook the whole of Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic science. The perpetrator could be recognized as insane, and because of the lack of hard evidence, the case and even wanted to close, but he showed his true face in the courtroom. An immature young family, Emma Ljungstig was a native of Stockholm, where she was born on February 16, 1985, where almost all of her childhood and adolescence passed. She was brought up in a simple family where she was the younger of 2 daughters and grew up with her older sister, Katharina. At the age of 19, the girl married a young man named Nicholas, with whom she began dating while still in high school. The chosen one was not much older than the girl, and at the time of marriage the bride was already expecting a child. In 20 years, Emma first became a mother, giving birth to a son who was named Max, and a year and a half later she gave birth to a second child, a daughter, Saga. But, despite the appearance of 2 common heirs, the couple were still too young and were not ready for family life and the hardships of everyday life. They constantly quarreled over trifles, could not find a common language, and soon after the birth of their daughter, decided that they should separate. But then, the question of custody of children, which was solved very hard and painful. Nicholas sought not only to help the children financially, but also to take a direct part in their lives and upbringing. Emma was not against it, but soon she had a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to her new lover, and took the children with her. The ex-husband was against it, because he wanted to be able to see his daughter and son every day. Ex-spouses repeatedly met in court to settle the matter, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, which she immediately reported to the police. Problems could not be solved peacefully in any way, and each of the parents began to seek sole custody. New love. Emma met a guy named Torgny Hellberg through the internet. They quickly found a common language, got close, and a romantic relationship began between them. The young man was not confused by the fact that the 23-year-old girl already has 2 heirs from a previous marriage, because he had long dreamed of a family and was ready to accept them as his own children. The newly married couple first lived in a small house, which was inherited by Torgny by inheritance. But when the lovers decided to get married, they moved to a larger house, where they could live comfortably, and each of the children would have their own cozy room. The man at that time had a good job with a decent salary, and Emma was engaged in raising small children as well as creating a home, but, being a designer by education, was going to work in the future in the specialty. The couple planned to play a wedding in the summer of 2008, but these plans were not destined to fulfill. Brutal massacre. March 17, 2008 was an ordinary Monday. Thorny went to work early in the morning and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. In the evening, the girl was preparing dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return. And at the same time, she was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, discussing a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At about 6:30 in the evening, Emma received a call from Thorny, warning her that he was late for work. He said they could start dinner without him. After the brief phone conversation, Emma continued with her household chores, fed the children, and then sat down at the computer again, continuing to text with her sister. At 07:07 p.m., their communication was abruptly interrupted, literally half a word. Katarina thought it was very strange, because she saw that her sister was typing a message to her, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, a worried Katarina called Emma, but she didn't pick up. Then she dialed Torgny's number to find out what had happened. The young man was on his way home from work and was just approaching the house, so he assured Katarina that everything was fine, that Emma was probably distracted by the kids, and that she would call her back as soon as she could. When the man arrived at the threshold, he was surprised to find that the front door was unlocked. When he went inside, he immediately noticed the mess, thinking that the children had made a mess while playing. But then he saw brown stains and stains on the floor, realizing with horror that it was blood. Helberg called Emma and the children's names loudly several times, but no one responded. In the hallway on the floor, the man saw a strange object, thinking at first that it was a doll, because the figure was lying in a completely unnatural pose. As he got closer, however, he realized that it was Saga in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition and turned into a bloody mess. A little farther away lay her brother in a similarly horrifying state, with a fractured skull. Their mother was also lying on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural posture. Her face was badly shattered and disfigured. It seemed that all of them were no longer showing signs of life. Shocked, Tony pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency number, reporting what had happened. At that moment, Emma shuddered and let out a loud, long groan. Police officers and paramedics immediately arrived on the scene and found a weak pulse in all 3 victims and quickly began resuscitation. The picture was horrifying. No one understood what kind of beast could do this to a young woman and her children. But saving their lives was the priority. So, first of all efforts were thrown at getting the victims of the attack to the nearest hospital for assistance. Fighting for lives and the beginning of the investigation. From the outset, the arriving paramedics expressed doubts about whether the victims could be brought to the hospital alive at all. However, all 3 were still alive when they arrived at the medical facility. All were diagnosed with open head injuries, with severe brain damage and extensive blood loss. No prognosis was given by the doctors, but only did the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they had managed to save their lives, it was unlikely that they would have ever been able to even breathe on their own. The condition of their mother was assessed as very serious, but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support machines, hoping her body could cope. While doctors were fighting for the lives of the victims, forensic experts were working at the scene, trying to find clues and reconstruct the picture of the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Scattered belongings, blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics left behind a lot of clutter, as well as moving certain items around to allow access to the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga were lying was literally trampled on, and now the medics had to figure out what footprints belonged to them and if the perpetrator's prints were there. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the 3 victims at most in 13 minutes. Since the last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 07:07 p.m., and at 07:20 p.m. already received a call to the police from a frightened Torgny. That said, the brutality with which the perpetrator massacred them spoke of some personal motive and a deep dislike for the victims. The weapon of the crime was a blunt and heavy object, presumably a hammer, which the mysterious criminal used to bludgeon his victims with ferocity. However, nothing of the kind could not be found at the scene, from which the natural conclusion was that the perpetrator took it with him. First suspect. From the start, Hellberg was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emma and was not the father of her children, and therefore it was suggested that perhaps a domestic quarrel between the couple could turn into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned, but he had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was really late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre of his loved ones, he was walking down the street and was caught on a number of CCTV cameras. Nevertheless, Torney was decided to take a detailed statement, as he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation of the crime. However, he could not remember anything specific, for it was business as usual until he saw the mess and the bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that alerted him was the unlocked front door, which could indicate that Emma had let the criminal in. After questioning, the man was released. By then, he had already informed his fiancée's family, and Emma's parents immediately rushed to Arboga from Stockholm. Together, they went by car straight to the hospital to the victims, but on the way there, they learned from the news on the radio terrible news. Max and Saga died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. Ex-husband's revenge? The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for more than a year and parted peacefully. They did not manage. They constantly quarreled, sued for custody of the children, and the man even threatened the ex-spouse, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything fits. After the breakup of the young woman took the children and took them to another city to his new chosen one, and their father, not having achieved custody through the court on the grounds of hostility to Emma, decided to take a desperate step and in a fit of rage and crucified the heirs. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody, but the man seemed crushed by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if there was some mistake. When he was charged with what had happened, he was at first stunned and then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was away in another city, where he went on business for a day. It sounded strange, but soon his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when someone was massacring his ex-wife and children. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators remained active at the scene, trying to find any clues, evidence, or traces of the attacker. But the perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. With traces of shoes, everything was much more difficult because the house was visited by a dozen doctors who rendered assistance and took out the victims. Now it was necessary to collect all the footprints there and to find out which of them did not belong to the medics, Torgny or the victims themselves. The law enforcers were afraid that the criminal, having learned that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital and finish what he had started. After all, she was a crucial witness, and in case she came to her senses and could testify, she would certainly give him away. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside Youngstig's room. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that at around 05 in the evening, a stranger in black clothes was walking around Emma and Torney's house. She thought it was strange, but she could not see the man's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested that it could be a girl because the figure was short and fragile. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood on his head also got into the lens of the street surveillance camera, located on the store a couple of minutes' walk from the scene of the crime. It also appeared to law enforcement that the woman in the video was a short, frail-looking girl. But who was she? And why would she wish harm on Emma and her children? The recording decided to show Torgny and to find out his opinion about who the stranger could be and whether he has any assumptions about it. Already from the first frames, the man began to change in his face, turned pale, and then said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schurer, although he could not say for sure. Who is Christina Schurer? Torgny's former sweetheart was born in Hanover, Germany in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. The girl grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. The girl received a good education in the field of history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, taking part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job in one of the popular hotels as a tour guide. There in July came on vacation 26-year-old Torgny, who immediately attracted Christina. He also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl, with whom he had an affair from the first days of acquaintance. Schurer at that time was 29 years old, but a small age difference did not embarrass the couple. Their connection lasted for a week while the guy was vacationing in the hotel, and after his departure they continued to communicate by phone and correspond on the internet. A few months later, Christina came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay at his house. Even then, such behavior seemed to Torgny too intrusive and even tactless. So when Christina offered him a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped that this was the last time they would meet. But the girl continued to call, write, and insist on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Torgny told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again, but Christina pretended not to hear it. She continued to call, asking to come to visit him, and calling Torgny to go on vacation with her. In the spring of 2007, Christina again came to Sweden and began to literally stalk the former boyfriend. She persuaded him to resume their relationship, although he honestly admitted that he is already dating another. Then Christina said that during the previous visit, forgot in his house something of the things, and she needs to take them away. Torgny agreed, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, the former lover tried to seduce him, and having received a firm refusal, said that he will still regret. 3 months later, Christina returned again and began to apologize for her behavior, again persuading the guy to get together, but he rejected her, and in the evening she called, saying that she swallowed pills because she does not want to live without him. Hellberg called her an ambulance and also called her family, telling them about Christina's antics and advising them to see a psychiatrist. After Schurer received the necessary care at the hospital, her mother took her away and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she spent more than a month. However, the treatment did not give much results, and the girl remained literally obsessed with her former lover, constantly thinking about how to get him back and inventing new reasons for meetings. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, where she rented an apartment with another girl. She started to pursue her ex-boyfriend again, and when she got to meet him, she told him that she had given birth to a son by him, but gave the child to a foster family. Torgny was shocked by this news, but what he was most interested in was when it had happened. The last time they had been intimate was more than a year ago, and after that, they had met 3 more times at different times, but Christine had shown no signs of pregnancy. She herself answered evasively, and each time added some new details. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Torgny, Christina wrote him a message in which she told him that their son had been diagnosed with a certain hereditary disease, and now they should go to Germany together to see him. She also added that the child's adoptive father would contact him and give him the details. At this time, she and Emma were in the process of moving to a new home, and the girlfriend was aware of the whole story. She believed that Tony's ex-girlfriend was simply trying to lure him to Germany, and no son had ever existed. When Tony received a call from a man who introduced himself as the adoptive father of her and Christine's child, Tony, on Emma's advice, began to ask questions about when the boy was born, in which hospital it happened, and so on. The interlocutor was clearly annoyed, avoided answering in every possible way, and then, and after all, hung up the phone. So Hellberg finally came to the conclusion that no son never existed. Christine made up the whole story and asked someone from the acquaintances to play along. Christina's arrest and the search for evidence. After learning such a convoluted story, detectives quickly found out where the new suspect lived and went to the address. The door was opened by her roommate, who told them that Christina had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said that she was going back to Germany. A check showed that the girl had indeed left the country, so now the Swedish police had to seek help from their German colleagues to arrest her. On March 20th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. When the suspect was arrested, she claimed that there had been a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was taken to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with Torney, which was denied. She was completely calm, but periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. Christina's rented apartment was thoroughly searched, and her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. All her clothes were thoroughly checked, but no traces of blood were found there. By then, investigators had worked out which of the bloody shoe prints at the scene did not belong to the medics and family members, so it was determined to be athletic. And from the tread pattern, they even figured out the brand and appearance. The size matched the one worn by the suspect, but she herself claimed that she never had such a model of sneakers. However, this statement was quickly refuted, as the shoes were identified by her roommate. Much more interesting findings awaited detectives in Christina's laptop. It was full of photos of Torgny, both their joint, and those where the man was depicted alone or in the company of his new lover. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant signature, contained pictures of Emma and her children, which the suspect copied from the rival's page in the social network. Scherer captioned each photo with insulting, threatening, and downright scary captions. In the recovered search history were found requests on how to commit a murder without leaving traces, how to hide traces of the crime, and how to divert suspicion from himself. Also in the notes, investigators found a plan of Emma and Torney's new home and notes that indicated when the man left for work and what time he returned, and some other notes regarding the family's daily routine. Interview with survivor. Emma's condition was stabilized, her vitals gradually began to improve, and towards the end of March, doctors decided to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, she was still unable to speak because of the breathing tube, but her gaze was meaningful. It was clear that she recognized the relatives present in the room, but did not understand what had happened to her and how she had ended up in the hospital. As soon as the victim became a little stronger and was able to speak clearly, the police agreed to talk to her, but decided not to tell her what had happened to the children. And then it turned out that Emma had no memory of the events of that fateful day, and believed that she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and whether they were all right. At first, she was given evasive answers, but then her family and medical team decided that there was no point in withholding such information. When Emma was told about what had happened and that her babies were no longer alive, she became hysterical. The doctors had to sedate her, after which she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This continued for several weeks, and during this time, the mother was told several times about the death of her daughter and son, but her brain apparently refused to accept this information, each time erasing it. After another month, Emma, accompanied by medics, decided to be brought to the scene. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman told how she was texting with her sister, setting the table, and the children were playing near her when there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and saw a dark, short female figure on the threshold, but when she asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and her eyes went black. The figure skulked into the house, and the desperate mother, out of her last strength, tried to catch up with her to protect her children, but but apparently fell in the hallway, where they tried to finish her off. The trial and the verdict. Christina continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The weapon of the crime was never found, and almost all the evidence found was circumstantial, which gave her a high chance of getting away with it. However, Christina's roommate, when questioned, said that in March a hammer was missing from her toolkit. She produced the toolkit itself, and the investigation determined that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the murder weapon. But that evidence was also circumstantial. Detectives were able to find surveillance footage from a suburban bus station, where Schurer had traveled 3 times in the week before the crime. She herself could not explain why she visited Arbuga so often, but apparently the girl came to keep an eye on her future victims. The suspect was also unable to explain why she was searching the internet for information on how to cover up the crime and why she was collecting photos of Emma and her children. On July 29, 2008, the trial over Christina, who was accused of double murder with particular cruelty as well as attempted murder, began. The defendant herself behaved more than strangely. Upon entering the courtroom, she smiled and began to wave her hand, greeting those present. When she was asked questions about the massacre and was shown gruesome footage of the crime scene with mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This suggested that the defendant was insane, but the appointed psychiatric examination established that the girl was sane and perfectly aware of what was happening. Consequently, she enjoyed what she had done and did not even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christina there, she fainted. When she was brought to her senses, she said that she finally remembered everything, and this face was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. Despite the defense lawyer's attempts to prove her client's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with no right to ever be released. She was also ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. No evidence was found that Christina had ever been pregnant and had given birth to a son by Torgny. As for young Stig, her recovery process was long and arduous, but Torgny did not abandon his beloved. They were married in the summer of 2010. The couple are now raising 2 common heirs who know the sad story of their older brother and sister. The Marlene Oakes case. Who owns the skull found in the woods? A crime is considered perfect when it has achieved its main goal and the perpetrator has not been punished or has not been suspected at all. However, these days, thanks to the latest technology and scientific approach, it is becoming increasingly difficult to commit such a thing. Moreover, even old, unsolved cases that seemed perfect in the past are being successfully solved decades later. In 1980, an auto mechanic named William Bill Major also thought he had committed the perfect crime that would never be solved. Hardly a man could have guessed that, more than 2 decades later, he will still have to stand trial and get a well-deserved sentence. And the initiator of the new investigation was his own daughter, whom he deprived of a mother in early childhood. And now, let's study the whole story in detail, deconstruct this perfect crime and imminent punishment. To be fair, it should be noted that this high-profile and very cruel case of the disappearance of a young mother, Marlene Oakes, could have been solved back in the distant 80s because the victim herself, who had a premonition of her imminent death, left many clues to the police, to which the law enforcers for some reason did not pay due attention. Marlene Oakes, the early years. A girl named Helen Marlene Oakes was born in 1954, the 7th of December, in the small town of Martinsville, in the state of Virginia, and was the middle of 3 children of the spouses Lorraine and William Oakes. She was raised with an older brother and a younger sister. Their family lived quite modestly, but the parents always tried to provide their children with everything they needed and bring them up worthy people. By the way, our today's heroine from childhood preferred to use her middle name, Marlene, which she liked much more than Helen. She was petite and very cute blonde, with brown eyes and a charming smile, so it was not surprising that she had a lot of admirers from an early age. At the age of 16, barely out of school. The girl, wanting to soon start an independent life and escape from parental care, hurried to tie herself to the bonds of marriage. Her chosen one was a man named William Major, who was 10 years older than her, but the couple in love, the difference in age did not confuse. The chosen one worked as an auto mechanic and seemed to the girl a serious and reliable man. Unhappy family life. Soon after the couple officially legalized their relationship, they settled in a trailer park on the outskirts of a small country town of Verona, located in Boone County, Kentucky. In 1972, the couple had their first common heir, a son, to whom they decided to give the name Donald. At that time, Marlene was barely 17 years old, and her husband was already 27 years old. 4 years later, the couple had a younger daughter, Lalana. The couple still lived in a small trailer on the grounds of the trailer park. Marlene was a homemaker, raising their children and making their modest home comfortable, while Bill worked at a service station fixing cars. He was good at what he did and was, so to speak, a jack of all trades. He had every chance to build a brilliant career, to open his own business, but the man did not particularly strive for anything. Money spouses barely enough for the essentials, but the head of the family, every time he managed to earn a little more, as a rule, spent it all on drink. Later, his addictions were joined by the use of illegal substances. At the same time, Bill was a sociable person, sociable and seemed very friendly to others. All these qualities helped him a lot in his work. People who turned to his workshop for help often came back again and also recommended Majors as a good specialist to their friends. However, at home, Bill became a completely different person, rude, selfish, and cruel. Former feelings that had once linked their lives together with Marlene seemed to have evaporated without a trace, left only misunderstanding, resentment, and irritation. The couple often quarreled, and sometimes their heated arguments escalated into violence. Bill was not a caring husband and loving father, and over time he became more and more like a domestic tyrant. A new neighbor and a secret lover. In 1978, a young Canadian named Glenn St. Hiller was passing through the town of Verona, and his truck suddenly broke down. On the advice of the locals, he went to the workshop of Bill Major, who willingly undertook to repair the vehicle. The stranger was traveling from Ohio to Texas. He didn't know anyone in the area, and the only hotel in the suburbs was closed, and he simply didn't know where to stay. When Glenn complained to the auto mechanic about the situation he found himself in, Bill promised to help, and quickly found him a place to stay in a trailer park and invited him over for dinner. The guest was literally enchanted by Marlene's beauty, her kindness and friendliness. The young woman cooked a delicious meal, willingly and with interest kept the conversation, seemed very nice and open. 2 weeks later, Glenn visited Verona again to thank Bill for his help, and after another month he decided to move here for a while. The man settled in the same suburban trailer park and took a job in Bill's shop, becoming Bill's subordinate. Also, the new neighbor began to show interest in Marlene, and in every possible way sought meetings with her. The situation in the family Major has long been very tense. The spouses only quarreled, shouted at each other, exchanged insults, and sometimes even fought. For Marlene, communication with kind and courteous Glenn became a real outlet. They quickly became close, and soon became lovers. The couple spent all their free time together, trying to hide from prying eyes, but in a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other, gossip spreads quickly. Soon the rumors reached Bill, but the cheating husband didn't seem particularly upset about it. Moreover, he even strangely encouraged their relationship, and he seemed to have lost interest in his young wife. The explanation for this behavior was soon found, and it turned out to be truly monstrous. Major, as it turned out, had an unhealthy interest in his own children, and soon he began to realize his secret fantasies. The ugly truth and the beginning of the divorce proceedings. Soon, Marlene noticed some oddities and changes in the behavior of 8-year-old Donald. The boy became withdrawn, nervous, did not sleep well, and was afraid to be alone with his father. When his mother decided to have a frank talk with him, the child told her the terrible things his father did to him and asked her to protect him.
Marlene was horrified by her son's confessions and realized that it was simply impossible to continue living like this. She had long planned to divorce Bill, get sole custody of the children, and move with Glenn and the kids to her native Virginia, closer to her parents. Her lover also suggested that she do this, and now there was a real reason to hurry up with the divorce and move. Marlene told her husband everything she had learned from her son about his unacceptable behavior, declared her intention to divorce, and also threatened to report him to the police. The scandal quickly escalated into manhandling, and Bill hit his wife hard in the face several times. From that moment, the spouses were literally in a state of war. Marlene initiated the beginning of the divorce process, but separated from her husband. She could not yet because of the children, because she wanted to achieve officially sole custody of them. Her husband beat her almost daily, insulted her, and threatened to kill her. He promised to kill her and said that he would make sure that no one would ever find the body and that he would stay with the children. The unhappy young woman simply did not know what to do. She secretly kept a personal diary in which she wrote down everything Bill said to her, how he threatened to kill her and cover his tracks. Moreover, several times, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, Bill described in detail how he would get rid of his wife, dismembered her, and hid the remains in different places. The most important role in hiding the crime he assigned to the removal of all the teeth, so that the body would not be identified by dental records. It is noteworthy that all these terrible things Meager and Cullors described not only his wife, but also some of his friends, who, however, did not take his words seriously. Meanwhile, the situation was escalating, and the neighbors who lived in the trailer park became daily witnesses of the stormy marital strife. Marlene runs away with no kids and no lover? Everyone knew that Marlene had filed for divorce and was planning to move to another state with Glenn and the children. No one judged Marlene. Everyone knew how difficult and unhealthy the situation was in her family. But relatives and neighbors expected that everything would be resolved in a peaceful and civilized way. On October 11, 1980, around noon, the spouses once again loudly scandalized, but soon all quieted down. Toward nightfall, an agitated and angry Bill led the children to one of the neighboring trailers and knocked. He said that his wife had run off with her lover, leaving his son and daughter behind, and asked him to watch the kids until tomorrow while he tried to find Marlene and bring her home. The neighbors agreed to shelter the children for the night, and immediately thought that the young woman had run away with Glenn, but wondered how a loving and caring mother could abandon her adored offspring. What was everyone's bewilderment when Glenn came out of his trailer in the morning, and to all the questions about the escape, he only stared at those around him incomprehensibly. It turned out that he had not seen his beloved since yesterday, and in general was not aware that she disappeared somewhere. Then Glenn himself went to Bill to clarify the situation, but the furious husband only shouted that his wife found another lover and lost her head. However, Glenn did not believe his words, because he knew for sure that no other man at Marlene was knocked, and she under no circumstances would not abandon the children. A day later, Major himself went to the police, where he reported the disappearance of his wife, outlining his version of events. He added that their family car had also disappeared, which he believed supported the runaway version. But the police also found the whole story very strange. They had the impression that Bill was making it up as he went along, sometimes contradicting himself and confusing himself in elementary clarifying questions. Search for the missing woman, interrogation of witnesses. The police decided to begin the investigation of this case with a survey of neighbors and relatives of the couple, as well as studying the circumstances of the disappearance of the young woman. All unanimously spoke about the difficult relationship between the spouses, but claimed that Marlene would never have left Donald and Lalana because she loved them more than life. There were also those who heard about Bill's creepy stories about how he would kill his wife and dispose of the body. This prompted the man's arrest and interrogation, but he himself claimed that it was just drunken chatter, and he didn't really intend to harm his spouse. The next oddity was that a search of the house revealed the missing woman's passport, wallet with cash and driver's license, as well as all of her personal belongings. It seemed as if she had just gotten into a car and left without her belongings, money, or documents. But where to? Marlene's relatives could not answer this question, but her sister mentioned about their last disturbing phone conversation, that Oakes was afraid for her life, and kept a diary in which she wrote down everything that happened to her. The information about the diary was of great interest to the detectives, but nothing similar was found when they searched the trailer. A few days later, Glenn showed up at the police station with the diary. He explained that Marlene had left her notes for him to keep, in case something happened to her, or she disappeared somewhere without a trace. When the woman did go missing, he waited a few days and then, realizing she wasn't coming back, took the notebook to the station. The pages contained some truly gruesome entries, including beatings, humiliation, and threats. There was also a detailed description of how Bill had promised to kill his wife. In addition, Marlene wrote about the fact that the husband showed a sick interest in children. In this regard, it was decided to talk to Marlene's son, but he did not provide any valuable information, practically did not answer questions, and only constantly asked to let him go home. For some reason, the detectives did not pay attention to the fact that the boy was scared and simply could not truthfully answer questions. His father had interviewed him beforehand, and Donald was afraid to say anything unnecessary for fear of his parents' anger. They decided not to traumatize 4-year-old Lalana and did not interrogate her. For the next few weeks, police officers scoured the neighborhood looking for any leads or clues. Marlene and her car were wanted statewide, but the young woman and the vehicle seemed to have vanished into thin air. There was no reason to believe she was dead or murdered. The investigation has reached a dead end. The move looks like an escape. Despite the fact that relatives and neighbors testified against Bill, and the man himself was repeatedly called in for questioning, no grounds for his arrest were ever found. Neither a body nor any conclusive evidence that Marlene might have been seriously injured was found, and she was still missing. Major began to quickly sell off his property, explaining that he was going to move closer to his parents because it is very difficult for him to manage 2 children after the escape of his wife. Among other things, he sold his weapons, namely a rifle, a shotgun, and a couple of pistols. His strange behavior resembled not a preparation for moving, but an ordinary escape. To the children, Bill kept telling them that their mother never loved them, so she abandoned them. He said that Marlene was an alcoholic, that she had tons of lovers who were more important to her than her family. Bill diligently turned his son and daughter against their own mother, trying to make them hate the most dear person. It should be noted that he succeeded quite well, because Donald and Lalana were still small and blindly believed their father. Soon Bill and his children moved to the state of Rhode Island, where his parents lived. There they purchased a trailer and settled down for many years. But after the disappearance of Marlene, in the life of Donald and Lalana began a real black streak. Their father brutally beat them, abused them, humiliated them, and did even more terrible things. At first, it was mostly Donald who was subjected to these tortures, but as Lalana grew older, the bitter fate did not spare her. About a year later, the man had a new lover named Pauline, with whom they began to live together, but could not legalize their relationship because Major was still married to the missing Marlene. Nevertheless, the couple had a child together, and for some time the family lived a quiet life, until one day Pauline herself did not witness what Bill was doing with his own son. She immediately went to the police, telling them everything, took her child, and left. Bill was eventually arrested, and his children went to live with their maternal grandparents in Virginia. A gruesome find in the woods. About 1.5 years after Marlene's mysterious disappearance, a hunter came across a frightening sight in a wooded area near a Verona trailer park. He saw that his dog had started digging in the ground, and something resembling a fragment of a human skull emerged. The man immediately reported it to the police, and the arriving experts confirmed his hunch. It was indeed a badly damaged skull. The found remains were immediately sent to forensic experts for a detailed study, and the conclusions of experts were really frightening. The skull had a missing lower jaw and not a single tooth. There were 2 bullet holes in it, and the shots were made at point-blank range. And also the experts revealed on the bones chopped marks from a large knife or axe, which probably separated the head from the body. It was impossible to determine unequivocally to whom this skull belonged, but judging from the size and condition of the bones, it was assumed that it was a young woman under 30 years of age. Naturally, the story of Marlene's disappearance immediately came to mind. The entire area within a radius of several kilometers was thoroughly combed, but no other remains or belongings were found, and so the discovery was dubbed Jane Doe, which means unknown, and the search was suspended. A new investigation 20 years later. When Donald and Lalana moved into their grandparents' house, their lives gradually got better. Most of all, they were afraid of the day when their father would be released, but Bill, after his release, was not interested in his grown-up offspring at all, and did not even try to get in touch with them. For a long time, Lalama did not talk about her mother at all, because she was angry at her for leaving them with a tyrant father. But one day, during a frank conversation with her grandmother, Lalana asked her why her mother had fallen out of love with her and her brother and left the family. To what the old woman replied that she did not believe in the story of the escape and believes that it was her spouse has dealt with her. At this point, the girl's world turned upside down. She looked at the situation in a completely different way and realized that the grandmother was right. The girl decided to conduct her own investigation and uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance. The first thing Lalana did was to keep a notebook in which she wrote down everything she could remember from her childhood, as well as everything her older brother knew and remembered. In 1998, when the girl was already 22 years old, she decided to go to her native Verona in order to talk to former neighbors and find out if any of them have valuable information that will help her. As it turned out, in those places still lived Glenn, who did not lose hope that one day the mystery of the disappearance of his beloved will be solved. His personal life has not developed. The man was lonely, worked at a local factory, and was constantly interested in the investigation of the case of Marlene Oakes. It was from Glenn Lalana learned about the diary that her mother kept, which she gave him for safekeeping before her disappearance. This diary was later added to the case file and lost somewhere on the shelves of the police archives. Lalana was able to get permission to see her mother's writings and was literally shocked by the contents of the diary. Not only did her mother know she was about to die, but she also gave the name of her killer, the method of death, and the process of hiding the evidence. After reading the notes, the girl immediately rushed to her father, whom she had not seen for more than 10 years, in order to find out the truth. It should be noted that Bill, after his release from prison, remarried, but in 1995 he had a stroke, and since then he has been confined to a wheelchair. When he learned the reason for his daughter's visit, he only laughed in her face. Lalana begged him to tell her where he had hidden Marlene's remains so that she could give her mother a decent burial. The girl promised that she would not go to the police, and everything Bill said would remain just between them. But the father only insulted his daughter, called her crazy, and said that she would never know what happened to her mother. From her mother's diary, Lalana learned about the perfect crime her father was preparing, which included dismembering her, removing all of her teeth, and burying the remains in different places. Also, Lalana, who along with her brother was bullied by Bill as a child, found out some horrific details from her father's biography. It turned out that even before meeting their mother, Bill served time for harassment. But for some reason, this circumstance police officers passed over when entrusted Majoru custody of the children after the disappearance of their mother. In 2000, 2 decades after Marlene's disappearance, her daughter initiated a new investigation into the case, providing all the materials she had managed to collect on her own. Lalana and her brother were re-interviewed, and this time they recounted everything their father had done to them, the beatings being the least of their troubles. At the same time, Lalana learned about an unidentified skull fragment with no teeth or lower jaw that had been found in the local woods a year and a half after her mother's disappearance. She began to insist on the need for DNA testing, but at the time the procedure was extremely expensive, and government agencies refused to cover the cost. However, Lalana did not even think of giving up and organized a fund to raise money for the procedure. Relatives, neighbors,
and just concerned people joined in, and eventually, by the beginning of 2001, Lalana already had the necessary amount of money to carry out the identification procedure. The analysis established the degree of the girl's kinship with the previously unidentified remains, and determined that the skull fragment found did indeed belong to the missing Marlene Oakes. Then Lalana, already having the results of the examination, went to her paternal grandfather to talk to him and find out if he knows anything. The elderly man was shocked by the news and agreed to testify to the police against his own son. Bill's father said that back in 1980, his son, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, told him that he killed his wife with 2 shots in the head, dismembered her body with a hunting knife, and buried the remains in different places at an impressive distance from each other. At the same time, he got rid of the lower jaw and teeth especially carefully. As for Marlene's car, he threw it off a cliff into the river, but the police eventually failed to find the car or its fragments. Most likely, for more than 2 decades, the turbulent mountain river either carried the vehicle far downstream or completely destroyed it, literally grinding it against sharp rocks. A trial and a just verdict. Despite the new circumstances and the evidence found, there was still no probable cause to arrest Bill. Then the police decided to go for a trick and asked Bill's father to bring his son to a frank phone conversation so that he confessed to everything. The trick succeeded, and Major, learning that his daughter seeks to resume the investigation, said that she will not succeed because he has safely hidden all the fragments of his wife's body, her car, and got rid of the instrument of crime. It was these words of Bill that became the reason for his arrest, because he actually confessed to everything himself. In July 2001, the man was taken into custody. After listening to the recording of the telephone conversation, as well as learning about the identification of the skull, he confessed to what he had done. However, he blamed everything on his late wife, saying that she simply drove him to scandals, cheating, as well as threats to take his children and forbid him to see them. At the trial, Bill told his version of the story, saying that he and his wife had a fight in the car and she started threatening him with a gun, but he grabbed the gun from her and allegedly, accidentally shot her twice in the head, except that the shots were fired into the back of her head at point-blank range, which looked like a premeditated crime, but not self-defense. Bill's trial did not begin until the summer of 2003, 23 years after his crime. At the hearing, the 59-year-old defendant was brought in a wheelchair. He himself behaved calmly and was confident that he would be able to avoid punishment. The lawyer hired by him insisted that this crime was the result of self-defense, and the stories of Lalana and Donald about harassment are not true. But despite the defense's best efforts, the court found Major guilty of the brutal, premeditated murder of Marlene Oakes. The man was sentenced to life in prison, which came as a complete surprise to him. In December 2016, Bill tried to apply for parole but was denied. A year later, he died in prison after suffering a second stroke. What keeps a marriage going when there's no love, trust, or basic respect? Some try to hold the family together for the kids. Others fear public judgment and care about others' opinions, while some are stopped by religious beliefs or a mix of these factors. But sometimes, the desire to save a marriage at any cost can turn into a horrible tragedy. The story of Jacqueline and Paul Crimble isn't unique, but it drew widespread attention due to its cruelty, greed, and cynicism. The criminal was dubbed the Black Widow and put behind bars, but her daughter confessed in a candid interview that her mother continued to ruin lives even while in prison. The relationship of Jacqueline and Paul Crimble. Jacqueline, or just Jackie Mary Bennett, was born on December 18, 1974, in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, as the youngest of 2 children in an ordinary middle-class family. From childhood, she was erratic, spoiled, defiant, and sometimes even aggressive. In her teenage years, Jackie's behavior got worse, becoming completely unmanageable, but her family blamed it on adolescence, hoping she'd grow out of it. In high school, she met Paul Crimble, who was 3 years older and her complete opposite in every way. But as they say, opposites attract, and this principle seemed to work perfectly here. Paul was a modest and shy young man from a religious family, a good student, considered very talented and promising. Jacqueline's boldness, energy, and confidence attracted him. She was the first, and likely the only girl he had serious feelings for. Jackie's parents approved of her choice and welcomed Paul, believing he would make their daughter more calm, sensible, and reasonable. Sometimes it seemed like her family treated Paul better than Jackie herself, accepting him as a family member from the day they met. However, Paul's parents were cautious about his choice but didn't stop the young couple's relationship. School friends also noted that the couple seemed incompatible. Jackie often provoked conflicts, preferring to solve them with physical force, while Paul tried to resolve everything peacefully, avoiding violence, and was considered friendly, open, and very responsible. He always kept his word and was ready to help others at any moment, described as a kind, sensible, and mature young man beyond his years. At 17, Jacqueline got pregnant by her boyfriend and immediately told him. At that time, she was in her final school year, and 20-year-old Paul was already a college student. Upon learning this, Paul immediately declared his readiness to marry her and take full responsibility for her and the child. Jacqueline wasn't ready for family life or raising a child, but terminating the pregnancy was out of the question. Neither Paul nor his religious family would allow such a grave sin. So Paul bought a ring and officially proposed to Jackie, who accepted. The couple had a modest wedding in 1992, celebrating with their closest family and friends. Interestingly, a few days before the event, Paul confessed to his best friend that he and Jacqueline were too different in every way, doubted the sincerity of her feelings, and was even afraid of her due to her temper. The groom also doubted whether he truly loved her or just felt sympathy and a sense of duty. But since he never had relationships with other girls, he had nothing to compare. His friend listened attentively and tried to dissuade Paul from marrying, warning him that he might make the biggest mistake of his life and be unhappy forever. However, Paul was determined, saying he couldn't leave a girl expecting his child. Besides, he believed that motherhood would change Jacqueline's character for the better, making her softer and calmer. In general, Paul hoped for the best, but he had no idea how wrong he was. Family life without love. In early 1993, the young couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Danielle. 6 years later, Jacqueline gave birth to their son, Adam. Paul was the sole provider for his family, ensuring they lacked nothing. After the birth of their second child, the Crimbles decided to find a more spacious home and purchased a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh, moving in 2000. By then, Paul held a senior mechanical engineer position, earning a solid salary. His wife, however, did not trouble herself with work, claiming she preferred managing the household and raising the children. However, she was not particularly good at either. Jackie was selfish, lazy, quick-tempered, and often showed aggression even towards her children. When the children grew a bit older, Jacqueline tried to find a job, but her quarrelsome and confrontational nature meant she never stayed employed for long. Furthermore, she spent nearly every evening at bars, consuming alcoholic drinks while her husband remained home with their daughter and son. Even when sober, Mrs. Crimble was not the most pleasant person, and under the influence of alcohol, she turned into a real fury. She not only provoked conflicts but also engaged in fights, used foul language, and behaved inappropriately with various men. Any remarks or requests to behave more modestly were met with aggression, and no one could predict what she might do next. Neighbors and family friends were aware of what was happening and genuinely felt sorry for Paul and the children, who suffered the most from Jacqueline's antics. Since the family lived in a small, quiet town, many people knew about the young woman's escapades and tried to avoid her. Her bad reputation affected her husband and children, who faced repercussions from peers at school. Jackie led a wild lifestyle without trying to hide it, frequently visiting entertainment venues. However, her presence there frightened not only other patrons but also the staff, who knew that her arrival inevitably meant a conflict or fight. Jacqueline kept her family in fear because she could lash out at them at any moment. Paul tried not to complain about the situation, but his friends, family, and colleagues noticed his discomfort around his wife, or even just mentioning her. He was often advised to leave this woman, but Paul feared losing the chance to see his children. In any argument, Jackie would immediately threaten to cut him off from their daughter and son. She also threatened to harm him by involving her acquaintances. These were men she regularly met at bars, who were ready to commit crimes for her sake. Paul usually yielded to his wife in such situations and kept silent. The mysterious attack. On Sunday morning, June 20th, 2004, a frightened woman called the emergency services, pleading for help. She claimed that 3 strangers attacked her and her husband in their home, beating them, tying them up, attempting to rob them, and then driving away with their car, taking her husband with them. The caller was Jacqueline Crimble, and police officers and medics immediately rushed to the address she provided. At the house, they found a woman with her hands tied behind her back with a plastic cable tie. However, her legs were not bound, leading the authorities to believe she had managed to partially free herself. Notably, the victim had no injuries or bruises on her body, even though she initially claimed that the attackers had beaten and tied them up. Fortunately, the couple's children were not at home, as they had been sent to spend the weekend with their paternal grandparents. According to Jacqueline, the previous evening on Saturday, she and her husband had gone to a bar to relax. They drank and returned home after midnight. However, as Paul was opening the front door, 3 figures suddenly jumped out of the darkness and pushed them inside the house. The intruders, brandishing a gun, tied up the couple, beat them, and demanded money and prohibited substances. Allegedly, Paul tried to reason with the criminals, begging them to release him and his wife and promising not to call the police, but this only angered them. They hit him several times and then began to strangle him with a plastic bag in front of the terrified Jacqueline. When it became clear that there was no cash or prohibited substances in the house, the intruders decided to at least steal the car, but for some reason took the owner with them, leaving the bound woman behind. After the criminals drove away with Paul, Jacqueline managed to reach the phone and call the police using her tongue. She was sure her husband might still be alive and begged the detectives to find and save him immediately. However, despite her distress, the woman appeared and acted suspiciously calm, though the authorities had no reason to distrust her at that moment. The mutilated body in the trunk. The couple's car was immediately reported missing throughout the county, and investigators began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They tried to gather any details about the attackers, but Jacqueline claimed that the criminals wore masks. She couldn't recall any distinguishing features like clothing details, speech defects, limping, or anything similar. All she could say was that there were 3 of them, and they were men. By Monday morning, less than a day after the search began, the Crimble family car was found abandoned just 3 miles from the house where the attack had taken place. It was parked in a deserted alley next to a long vacant house. Inside the trunk was the mutilated body of its owner, bearing clear signs of beating and torture. The 35-year-old man's hands were tied behind his back, his legs bound with a cable tie, and his face and body covered with numerous bruises. When Jackie was informed of the gruesome discovery, she reacted surprisingly calmly. It seemed the brutal deprivation of her husband, the father of her children, didn't bother her much. She tried to feign surprise and pain but couldn't muster a single tear and literally asked when she would get her car back within a minute. This all appeared very suspicious, prompting law enforcement to take a closer look at the young widow. The main suspect. Initially, Jacqueline's version was not questioned and was considered the only credible account. However, the strange behavior of the widowed mother of 2 led law enforcement to suspect she might be lying. Soon it was revealed that her marriage to Paul had been falling apart for a long time. and she was never a model wife and mother. Not only neighbors and acquaintances spoke poorly of her, but even her children and parents. It also came to light that Jackie had been seeing a man named Roger Ferguson for several months. He owned a farm in Armagh where he lived with his mother. She and Crimble were often seen together in various entertainment venues in town, drinking alcohol. Moreover, Roger visited the married woman at her home when her husband was at work and the children were at school and daycare. Just the day after the car with the disfigured body was found, Jacqueline went from victim to the main suspect, and Roger was considered a possible accomplice. The woman did not appear to be a grieving widow and was much more concerned about getting her car back. Furthermore, her account of an attack by a gang of armed addicts sounded implausible. Nothing like this had ever happened in the quiet town before, and where had they gone after abandoning the vehicle with a body in the trunk? Additionally, the mysterious criminals managed to leave no traces, which was also strange. There were no other witnesses who saw suspicious strangers in town. However, almost everyone who ever interacted with the victim spoke negatively about her. Moreover, it soon emerged that the deceased man had an insurance policy, and his wife could expect a large payout of £300,000 sterling in the event of his passing. Now, a real motive had appeared in this case, which could explain the crime. Investigation into the crime. Jacqueline claimed she managed to call for help by dialing on a button phone with her tongue. The device was taken for examination, and indeed, traces of her saliva were found on it. However, at the initial crime scene inspection, investigators noted the phone was on the coffee table face down. With her hands tied behind her back, there was no way she could have turned it over after the call or dialed for help if it was in that position from the start. The couple's home computer search history revealed strange queries. Someone had been looking for information on life insurance, payout amounts, and procedures in the event of the policyholders passing for months. When Jacqueline was directly asked about this, she said she knew nothing and suggested that perhaps Paul was interested in it. Roger Ferguson, who was considered a potential accomplice in the crime, had a rock-solid alibi. His mother claimed he spent the night at home because he wasn't feeling well, and around 1:30 in the morning, she was searching the home medicine cabinet for something to treat his stomach issues. Despite the elderly woman's convincing testimony, they didn't remove her son from the suspect list just yet. Police decided to track the suspect's locations on the night of the crime through their cell phone signals, discovering that Roger had not been home as his mother claimed. Instead, he was at the Crimbles' house, where he stayed for several hours. Additionally, he continued his relationship with the widowed woman, and they were seen together at a bar the day after Paul's funeral. Another curious detail was that Jacqueline and Roger visited a car dealership together, where they were looking at SUVs and inquiring about installment plans for such an expensive purchase. Roger's mother was even with them, which seemed even more suspicious. The police suspected that the lovers had already planned how they would spend the insurance payout after Paul's passing, and Roger's mother was likely aware. However, during interrogations, Jackie insisted she never cheated on her husband and certainly didn't wish him harm, but no one believed her anymore. Shortly before the tragedy, Jacqueline had started working as a caregiver in a nursing home, but lasted only a few weeks before being fired due to constant conflicts and lies. Nevertheless, she didn't tell her husband, continuing to pretend she was going to work or had night shifts while staying at Ferguson's house. The deception was accidentally revealed when Paul met one of his wife's former colleagues who told him everything. He tried to talk to his wife, but this only sparked another argument. She threatened to leave him for her lover, take the children, and forbid their biological father from approaching them. This was Paul's biggest fear, so he agreed to compromise and turned a blind eye to her infidelity. He could only confide in his closest friend, who later testified in court as a witness, recounting Paul's words. The development and execution of a devious plan. Roger wasn't particularly smart. He was strong but somewhat simple-minded and easily led. Jacqueline quickly managed to completely dominate him, manipulating her lover to do her bidding. He would readily get into a fight for her, which flattered her immensely. He was likely genuinely in love with her and believed everything she said. The woman complained to Ferguson about her husband, accusing him of being rude, cruel, and even physically abusive. Naturally, this was all lies, but with each complaint, the lover grew to despise Paul more, believing he was harming and oppressing Jacqueline and was the main obstacle to their happiness together. She implanted the idea in his mind that by eliminating her husband, all their problems would be solved, allowing them to be together while receiving a substantial sum of money for a comfortable life. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, Mrs. Crimble tried to find people willing to commit the crime for money, but after considering several options, she and Roger abandoned the idea. It seemed the lovers decided they could carry it out themselves without leaving evidence or witnesses, ensuring they kept the entire insurance payout. On Friday, June 18th, Jacqueline took the children to stay with their grandparents for the weekend. On Saturday, she suggested that her husband go out for drinks to relax and talk. Paul gladly accepted the offer, thinking it might help their relationship. He didn't realize it was an invitation to his demise. That night, people in the bar noticed Jackie trying hard to get her non-drinking husband intoxicated. She bought drinks and practically forced him to knock back one shot after another, then led her staggering husband out of the bar after midnight. They were caught on surveillance cameras, and that was the last time Paul was seen alive. This revealed a significant timing discrepancy. The bar was a 10-minute walk from the couple's home, and the attack occurred immediately upon their return, lasting no more than 15 minutes, according to Jacqueline. After that, her husband was supposedly kidnapped and driven away in their car, and she immediately called the police. However, about an hour and a half elapsed between the time they were captured on camera and the call to the police. Investigators believed this time was spent by the perpetrators covering their tracks and staging the scene of an attack by third parties. Moreover, Jacqueline apparently intentionally got her husband drunk so he couldn't resist. According to her, the criminals kicked Paul while he was down, then began to strangle him by placing a plastic bag over his head and securing it with tape. The nature of the injuries on the deceased's body confirmed her account, but the police were nearly certain by then that the assailants were she and her lover, Ferguson. Incontrovertible evidence. After a long and thorough examination of the crime scene, detectives found a partially erased footprint of a man's shoe, which had been obviously attempted to be cleaned, but poorly. The tread pattern matched Roger's shoes, but this evidence could be considered circumstantial. However, there were other, more substantial pieces of evidence against the criminal couple. In the kitchen trash, a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva was found, and on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands was a partial fingerprint of his. Moreover, on the ties binding the deceased's hands and feet, Ferguson's fingerprints were present, and on the bag used to suffocate the victim, sweat and oil traces of both lovers were found. The investigation also uncovered another participant in this brutal crime, a minor acquaintance of Roger named Colin Robinson. Roger called him on the night of the attack, asking for a favor to help with something unspecified. The teenager drove his car, left it at the end of the street at Roger's request, and walked to the house to avoid attracting attention. When Colin realized what was happening, he wanted to run, but Roger intimidated him and by threatening with a knife, forced him to help move the body to the car and load it into the trunk. Afterward, they drove the car to a deserted place and abandoned it. Initially, the frightened young man denied his involvement in the crime, but he broke down during the second interrogation and began to confess. Trial and sentence. The investigation lasted several months. During this time, they gathered undeniable evidence, interviewed all witnesses, and obtained a confession from the third participant in the crime. However, The trial of the criminals only began in the spring of 2007, almost 3 years after Paul Crimble's deprivation of life. On May 7, 2007, Jacqueline and Roger were found guilty of a premeditated crime with the intent to obtain insurance money. The widow was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her lover and accomplice received 18 years. The young accomplice, Colin Robinson, was sentenced to 3 years for assisting the criminals and attempting to cover up the truth. Roger's elderly mother also couldn't escape responsibility for perjury and providing a false alibi for her son. However, considering the woman's advanced age and her serious health problems, she was given only a year of probation. Revenge on her own children. Even in prison, Jacqueline continued to ruin her family's lives. She was angry that no one supported her in court, and that everyone who knew her personally was relieved when she went behind bars. Even her own mother said that people like Jackie should be isolated from society forever so that they can't harm anyone. Interestingly, a few days after the funeral, Jacqueline burned all of her late husband's belongings and photos, so nothing in the house reminded her of him. Danielle somehow managed to save a couple of photos with her father. She kept them in her bedside table, and her mother simply didn't know about them. The insurance payout of £300,000, for which Paul was assassinated, went to his children. Danielle and Adam lost both parents overnight, but their troubles didn't end there. Their mother was adamantly against either her parents or the murdered husband's parents raising the children. She did everything to deprive them of guardianship rights, so the children ended up in foster care despite having living grandparents. At the time of the tragedy, Danielle was only 11, and her brother Adam was barely 5. Jacqueline managed to retain her parental rights and attempted to manipulate her children from prison. Specifically, she wanted them to publicly declare her innocence using various pressure tactics. For example, she promised to sign permission for their school trips if they visited her in prison, but she deceived them. During the visit, she demanded they testify in her favor and refused to sign the document. As a result, the brother and sister were the only ones who couldn't go on weekend excursions with their class. Now Danielle is 31, living in Basingstoke, working in a daycare, and dating a man named Simon Bryce, who is an engineer. Her brother, now 25, has a good education and moved to London. Jacqueline is set to be released next year, and her adult children are seriously worried that their mother will continue to do everything possible to poison their lives.
Did you know that 1 in 8 people on Earth suffer from a mental health disorder? According to statistics, there were almost 1 billion people with mental health disorders in 2019. Such diseases lead to unemployment, disability, and crime. Among them, 2 groups are distinguished. The first includes serious mental health disorders such as schizophrenia, hallucinations, psychoses, and borderline conditions. The second category is represented by neurotics and psychopaths, aggressive and demonstrative personalities. Sometimes people are unaware of their diagnosis for decades. Some of them live a normal life without causing harm to others. Therefore, the clinical diagnosis of psychopath is not made today. The disease is called otherwise character disorder or antisocial personality disorder. Of course, not all psychopaths are violent criminals, but many of them pose a threat to the well-being of another person. For example, his or her self-esteem, mental balance, or finances. Nevertheless, there are some people who are so rude and out of control that they have to serve serious sentences for the crime they committed or be hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. The story in question happened to Nicola Edgington, a British citizen. Amazingly, a young woman suffering from mental illness has repeatedly asked the relevant authorities, including the police, to pay attention to her condition so that she did not make trouble. And what came out of it you will learn further. On October 10, 2011, an egregious incident occurred in Bexley Heath in the southeast of England. In the early hours of the morning, 2 women were attacked on a street in the town. The first victim was Carrie Clark, a 22-year-old artist. The girl was standing at a bus stop waiting for transportation. Without a hint of danger, was listening to music. At that time, she was approached by an unfamiliar woman in her 30s. Without further ado, she jumped on Carrie and stabbed her. Carrie fell to the ground in surprise. The attacker rushed at her, but the girl's reaction was faster. She grabbed the knife with her hand before the weapon reached her chest. The unconditional reflexes to survive were stronger than the situation. The victim even managed to push her abuser away. Carrie intercepted the knife, despite the pain from the blade, and began to scream. She called for help. At the same time, the girl asked her attacker what she was doing and if her head was all right. To which the woman replied that the only person with a knife in her hand on this street was Carrie herself. In addition, she demanded that she hand over the knife, which the resourceful Carrie certainly did not do. The atmosphere, as well as the conversation that took place between them, puzzled the intruder, and she fled to the other side of the street. However, the matter did not end there. While passers-by rushed to the victim, the criminal disappeared from sight. It turns out that she went into a butcher shop, where she stole a knife. Then she noticed another woman standing with her back to her. Without thinking twice, she rushed towards her. The attack on 58-year-old Sally Hodkin was fierce and ruthless, striking her in the neck. The attacker practically decapitated the poor elderly woman. Before she knew it, she fell to the ground and died. The perpetrator fled the scene as quickly as she had appeared. Perhaps the accidents would have continued further if not for the arrival of the police. They managed to track down the inadequate woman through CCTV cameras. A short while later, she was arrested in one of the nearby stores. At the time of her arrest, she appeared unperturbed. The law enforcement officers got the impression that she was even happy to be caught. The detainee was taken to the station where she was identified. The attacker turned out to be 31-year-old Nicola Edgington, who suffers from a mental health disorder. The woman has been admitted to an institution to deal with her acute condition. Meanwhile, detectives have launched an investigation into the case. Nicola was born on September 9, 1980, to Marion and Harry Edgington. She was the eldest among the other children, brother Tom and sister Sarah. The married couple was famous in certain circles. The father of the family was a respected foreign correspondent for the Daily Mail, a British daily newspaper. His wife was just like him, educated and charming. Tom and Sarah were quiet and obedient children. They did not cause much trouble to their parents. That could not be said of Nicola. The girl was a difficult child from an early age. Despite her angelic appearance, she possessed a devilish character. At school, she insulted her classmates, often hitting them. She studied badly and was insolent to her teachers. In addition, at home, Nicola provoked quarrels between parents. Eventually, conflicts and tension led to divorce Edgingtons. Harry moved to France, but continued to keep in touch with his children. Marion was concerned about her daughter's behavior. She repeatedly showed her to a psychologist and conducted various kinds of examinations. However, they did not give the proper result. Everything was written off on the peculiarities of the girl's character. Many years later, her brother Tom said that her sister just knew how to pretend to be normal. After the dissolution of the marriage, relations with her mother became strained. In addition, the girl had grown up. By her early teens, she had become completely uncontrollable. The young lady allowed herself to be absent from home for days at a time. Due to this, Marion repeatedly contacted the police. Once, Nicola called the social service with a request to place her in a care center. The girl complained about her mother. It is not known exactly whether she really needed help or did it out of spite. However, her wish was heard. As protective measures until the circumstances are clarified, the girl was taken away from home and placed in a specialized institution. However, there the young lady showed herself in all her glory, after which she was returned home. The social worker stated that she was a danger to other children. When Nicola returned home, her behavior only worsened. She started drinking and smoking and got involved with bad company. For this reason, Marion and her children were forced to move to Forest Row in East Sussex. The woman dreamed of starting a new life where no one knew them. In the new place, Nicola began to study in a state comprehensive school, while Tom and Sarah went to live in a boarding school. Tom later recalled that he understood his mother's circumstances. Moreover, he enjoyed life away from his inadequate sister. He realized that Nicola's behavior was destructive to the psyche and well-being of the family. Consequently, on weekends, Tom did not even want to return home. When Nicola was 15 years old, she dropped out of school. The girl did not accept her mother's request to finish her studies. She believed that she could do without education. In addition, she stopped perceiving the words of Marion. From this, their relationship became even more complicated, sometimes violent. One day, Nicola hit her mother with a cell phone. This gave the woman a black eye. The incident was reported to the police. However, Nicola only received a warning that it was unacceptable. In the end, it was decided to separate. Nicola was probably the initiator, as she had long wanted to get away from her mother's hyperparenting. Nicola settled on the south coast of England in Brighton. Rent an apartment helped her father, about whom, by the way, she spoke negatively, claiming that more than once she was abused by him. However, Mr. Edgington denied these allegations. For a short time, Nicola managed to work as a hairdresser, a sales clerk, but nowhere for a long time. Some sources claim she also made a living as a stripper. Leading a free lifestyle at the age of 17, Nicola suspected she was pregnant.
A medical examination confirmed it. The doctor informed Nicola of the impending birth of twins. However, the babies were not destined to be born, as Nicola's boyfriend punched her in the stomach. At the age of 19, she got pregnant again. This time, the father of the baby was another boyfriend who was involved in the trafficking of illegal drugs. By then, Miss Edgington was also using drugs, which triggered the birth of the baby 3 months premature. Nevertheless, the boy was brought out, and Marion helped to care for him. Once out of work, Nicola continued to lead a binge lifestyle and use illegal substances. Because of this, she came under the supervision of the relevant doctors. It would seem that Nicola's life should have continued in a similar vein, but suddenly, there was a bright streak. She met a guy from Jamaica in a nightclub. He turned out to be a nice man. Subsequently, the young people got married. Another child was born in the marriage. The identity of the Jamaican is not disclosed, but it is known for sure that the period of their relationship was favorable. The man was an excellent father. He loved not only his son, but also his stepson. He was also a decent spouse. He took care of his wife, making sure she took the medication prescribed by her doctor. The medication regulated her mood, and thanks to it, Nicola became relatively calm. After a while, the woman embraced religion and joined the controversial Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. There she was persuaded that everything was the will of the Almighty, not man-made medicines. So she stopped taking them, which worsened Nicola's condition. Among other things, she was brainwashed. Poor mental health and self-injury played a cruel trick on the young woman. She began to claim that she could see demons and people disappearing into the kingdom of God. She also believed that there was a 100-eyed monster on earth that guarded the throne of God from enemies and took the form of a police force. Later, one of the doctors said that the patient confessed to him that she thought God had supposedly left her, taken everyone else, and abandoned her. Nicola was saddened by this, as according to her she loved and believed in him very much. She also saw storefronts as if they had experienced an apocalypse. In other words, she was talking religious nonsense and apparently catching hallucinations from time to time. At this time, presumably because of migration problems, her husband was forced to return to his home country. Seeing his wife's condition, he took the children with him. However, after a while, Nicola persuaded him to give up the eldest child, motivated by the fact that he is not his own father. Although the former spouse was concerned about her health, he still had to give the child to his mother. Apparently, he hoped that the grandmother would join the upbringing of the boy. Back home, Nicola became even more aggressive and violent. Marion worried for her grandson's safety. However, the daughter limited her mother's involvement in her son's life. Eventually, at the age of 5, the child was handed over to social services. As it later turned out, he returned to the custody of his stepfather in Jamaica. Consequently, all government benefits, including welfare and living in a city council-funded apartment, were canceled for the woman. She had to return to her parents' home. Her mother, although afraid of her daughter's actions, did not deny her shelter. There, their relationship deteriorated further. Once Nicola threatened their neighbor with a knife and damaged his property. The police limited themselves to issuing a warning the second time. At the same time, she was examined by a doctor who found no signs of mental disorder. During the investigation into the murder of Sally Hodkin and the attack on Carrie Clark, it was discovered that Nicola Edgington had already committed crimes in the past. However, she was rehabilitated a short time later and was living at large under specialist care. What turned out to be appalling was that the woman had committed a crime against a close family member, and in all likelihood did not fully realize what had happened. It was November 4th, 2005, when the entire Edgington family met for the first time in a long time. Only Harry, the father of the family, was absent. Tom and Sarah decided to visit her mother, and in order not to create obstacles in communication between his daughter and her mother, Tom decided to distract Nicola. He invited her to the local pub. Initially, their communication did not build, but after a while, Nicola said that she would soon move to London. At the same time, she was writing something down in a notebook. When Tom asked her what she was writing, her sister didn't answer, only smiled enigmatically. Afterwards, Nicola got into an argument with a member of the venue's staff, resulting in her being kicked out. Tom wanted to continue the evening on a good note, so he called his mother and suggested that she and Sarah join him. Marion declined, and the younger sister decided to keep her brother company. If they had known then how the evening would end, they would never have left their mother alone with Nicola. Back in the house, Tom noticed a strange clutter on the cot his mother had put in the guest room. It looked like a pile of clothes with someone's legs sticking out from underneath. Tom didn't realize what he was seeing. The man figured someone had spent the night at his mother's house. He reported it to Sarah. However, she decided to see if it was true, and she was right. Sarah's deafening shout of calling the police came from the room. In fact, the legs Tom saw belonged to 60-year-old Marion. The woman was dead, and stab wounds were visible on her body. In addition, there was no older sister in the house. The family suspected that she might have been involved in the crime. Their assumptions were confirmed when, searching the house for Nicola, Tom found a familiar notebook. On the first page, a list of names was written in her handwriting under the general title, "Doomed to Death." First on the list was Marion's name, which had been crossed off. After arriving at the crime scene, forensic investigators began examining the victim's body. They found 9 stab wounds and penetrating wounds inflicted with a kitchen knife. Later, a version was put forward that the crime occurred during a conflict between women. At the same time, a search for the missing woman was underway. Sarah made a plea on television for Nicola to return home. On November 21st, 2005, Nicola Edgington was detained on her way to London. The first thing she underwent was a psychiatric evaluation. Nicola was found to be in an emotionally unstable state. She spent some time in prison before being transferred to the Bracton Center in February 2006. This facility was for people with mental health problems who had committed a crime. Specialists at the center determined that the woman could not stand trial until her health condition improved. 8 months later, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility. The psychiatrist's report stated schizophrenia and emotionally unstable personality traits. The doctor who observed the patient opined that she needed inpatient treatment for further behavioral risk assessment and long-term rehabilitation. Ultimately, the judge, under the Mental Health Act 1983, sentenced the defendant to be detained in a psychiatric clinic indefinitely. At the clinic, the young woman was treated with antipsychotic medication to stabilize her emotional background. However, Nicola's behavior was disturbing. It was abusive and defiant. The patient did not want to remember the crime she had committed and was looking forward to being discharged as soon as possible. In addition, she showed an increased interest in the male patients of the center. Despite this, in November 2007, the medical commission decided to transfer the woman to another room where the patients could lead a freer life. It is unlikely that this move was related to the improvement of her condition. Rather, it was probably done to free up bed space. In the new ward, the medication doses were reduced, which had a negative effect. In addition, the mentally ill person had an affair, which also affected her mood. Despite these circumstances, the heroine of the story was discharged on September 29, 2009. Nicola began to live in a subsidized apartment provided by the state in such cases. A woman who could have fallen off the wagon at any time was not left to fend for herself. She was assigned to the so-called Interagency Public Protection System. It brings together several agencies whose responsibility it is to ensure the safety of citizens from criminals who are released to live in the community. At the same time, Mrs. Edgington expressed concern about being alone at night. However, she was assured that she was supervised around the clock. In addition, there was a contingency and assistance plan in place. Nicola lived in these conditions for 2 years. She was visited periodically by a psychiatrist and a social worker. In turn, she was assessed as necessary. Surprisingly, during this time, she was allowed to travel to her ex-husband's home to visit her children. In 2011, she was in a relationship with 2 men living in the home in question. They were also under supervision, so communication between them was prohibited. However, they violated the prohibition. Consequently, in March, the highly anticipated event occurred. Nicola became pregnant again. In order to carry the baby and deliver it healthy, she was taken off her medication. After a while, the pregnancy broke down, however. The ward did not resume treatment. In September 2011, the woman decided to contact her brother. She sent him a message on Facebook, telling him that she repented for killing her mother. Nicola wrote that she missed his support and that no one cared for her as much as Marion did. Nicola also reported a failed pregnancy. She left him her phone number and asked him not to tell their father about the correspondence. Tom's response was brutal. Her brother couldn't forgive her. He wrote that she was a cold-blooded criminal who had forced him to discover the body of a loved one, something he would never forget. Lastly, Tom added that the news of the failed pregnancy made him happy. Moll, people like his older sister, should not reproduce, and all she has to do now is to voluntarily pass away after doing a favor to others. After that, on October 6th, 7 and 9, Nicola had a nervous breakdown. During this time, she repeatedly called the police, reporting that she was receiving death threats. The police responded to the call, however, did not find anything suspicious. After that, they stopped paying attention to her calls. In September 2011, the woman decided to contact her brother. She sent him a message on Facebook, telling him that she repented for killing her mother. Nicola wrote that she missed his support and that no one cared for her as much as Marion did. Nicola also reported a failed pregnancy. She left him her phone number and asked him not to tell their father about the correspondence. Tom's response was brutal. Her brother couldn't forgive her. He wrote that she was a cold-blooded criminal who had forced him to discover the body of a loved one, something he would never forget. Lastly, Tom added that the news of the failed pregnancy made him happy. Moll, people like his older sister should not reproduce, and all she has to do now is to voluntarily pass away after doing a favor to others. After that, on October 6th, 7 and 9, Nicola had a nervous breakdown. During this time, she repeatedly called the police, reporting that she was receiving death threats. The police responded to the call, however, did not find anything suspicious. After that, they stopped paying attention to her calls. Nicola sought comfort. She tried to seek help from the specialist assigned to her. However, she was unable to do so because the office was closed at weekends. She turned to her faith again, but this did not help her either. Nicola's condition worsened. On October 10, 2011, the climax came. At 3 in the morning, the woman called a cab and asked to be taken to Lewis Hospital. When she arrived, for some reason, she told the driver that the clinic was closed and asked to return home. By the way, the treatment facility was open. but Nicola's condition alerted the driver. After a while, she started talking about being sick and needing treatment. In addition, she had not paid for the road, so around 4:30 a.m., the cab driver decided to report what was happening to the police. A patrol car picked up Nicola and took her to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There she said she wanted to leave because she didn't feel safe. However, the officers left her there alone and drove away. Nicola tried to calm herself down by starting to call everyone who could help her. First, she dialed her district nurse. As it later turned out, the nurse did not answer as she was ill. Mrs. Edgington also wrote to her social worker, tried to call the Bracton Center, but was unsuccessful, either by the law of meanness or because it was early morning and everyone was asleep. After a while, she asked the receptionist if the doctor would be in soon, to which she replied that it would have to wait a little longer. Nicola got angry and blurted out, "Do I have to kill someone to get attention?" The staff member again asked her to be patient. No one seemed to care about the woman's condition. Nicola therefore called the emergency number and asked for the police to be sent to her. The woman said that she had previously killed a man in a similar condition and needed help again. The dispatcher assured her that he would send some officers soon. In the end, no one arrived. She dialed a familiar number again and asked to be arrested while she hurt someone. Nicola repeated that she had schizophrenia and was having another attack. The police asked her where she was. She gave the address of the hospital. Then they called the clinic. The nurse assured the police that Nicola was under control. At 5:30 a.m., she was finally seen by a nurse. After another hour, Nicola was escorted to the hospital's psychiatric ward. At 6:40 a.m., the doctor on duty came to see Nicola. But he made a mistake by leaving her alone in the ward and not checking the door behind him. After 7 a.m., the woman got tired of waiting. She pushed the front door, which turned out to be open because of a broken mechanism. This is how Nicola managed to escape. Upon returning, the doctor realized that the patient was missing and reported it to the police. It was only at this point that Nicola was checked through the databases. They became aware that all this time, they had been communicating with a man who once took the life of his mother. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Nicola was out of control and attacked two unfortunate women who fell into her hands. CCTV cameras later showed Nicola's route of travel. She boarded public transport and arrived in the city center at around 8:25 a.m. After getting off the bus, the unstable woman went to a supermarket where she stole a kitchen knife. What happened later is already known. Nicola Edgington appeared in court in early 2013. The woman pleaded not guilty to charges of murder and attempted murder. The parties were divided. Several psychiatrists spoke at the trial. A defense witness, Dr. Adrian Cree, told the court about Mrs. Edgington's strange statement. When he assessed her in 2005, he said the defendant believed that her boyfriend, whom she had dated for 2 years, was actually the father of her first child. Allegedly, he returned to the UK and changed his style of dress as well as his appearance. He then started a relationship with her for a second time, introducing himself as Philip. The psychiatrist added that he was convinced that Nicola was a paranoid schizophrenic. According to the prosecution, the prevailing diagnosis of the defendant was still borderline personality disorder with rational ability. Her actions on the unfortunate day were consistent and deliberate. The prosecutor referred to a recent medical report. It indicated that there was no need for inpatient treatment for Mrs. Edgington. However, according to the defense, the woman was clearly suffering from schizophrenia and other mental problems. Therefore, her responsibility at the time of the crime was reduced. The defense lawyers reported that Nicola's condition is very serious. In turn, Nicola said that sometimes she feels like she is caught in a computer game, and the only way to keep herself safe is to be with the police. Allegedly, she has formed a belief that if she commits theft, she will be caught. She also admitted that she doesn't remember the period of time between going to the store and being arrested. She admitted to the stabbing, but pleaded diminished responsibility due to her mental state. On February 7, 2013, a jury found Nicola Edgington guilty of the charges against her. On March 4th, Judge Brian Barker sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 37 years, the minimum sentence. He exposed the woman as a skillful manipulator who made a choice, for which she will be held accountable to the full extent of the law for the rest of her life. Do you think Nicola received sufficient punishment for her actions? Or did some representatives of the special services treat her condition negligently enough, thus provoking the crime?
According to statistics, the number of crimes committed by juveniles has been increasing worldwide in recent years. There has been an upsurge in violence among school children, usually directed at their peers, and the victims are often hospitalized, disabled, or even killed after such incidents. Such hostile acts usually have one goal: to prove their own superiority, power, and permissiveness. Plus, the laws of many countries are lenient to juvenile offenders, which gives them faith in their impunity. The story of a French girl named Agnès Marin, who died at the hands of a high school student, shook the whole country. They studied in a prestigious college with an impeccable reputation in which it seemed nothing like this could not happen. However, as it soon turned out, the perpetrator had attacked the girls before, but his wealthy parents managed not only to keep the case quiet, but also to arrange a son in a good school in another city, hiding the truth about his adventures. It is said that teenage aggression is a form of protest during the period of personality formation and search for oneself. But in our story today, this boy's cruelty was the result of a complete lack of empathy, the ability to empathize and sympathize with others. He was extremely dangerous to society and incorrigible, and therefore became the second teenager in French history to be sentenced to life imprisonment.
Who was Agnès Marin? Agnès Marin was born in 1999, November 26th in Paris, and was the only child of the couple Paula and Frédéric Marin. The girl grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Parents adored their child and sought to give her all the best. Agnès, from an early age, did not know anything to refuse. She was dressed in brand-name stores, taken to the sea, bought expensive toys and gadgets. Marin was an active, sociable, and restless child. She always had a lot of friends and hobbies. She showed creativity, loved music and movies, and in the future dreamed of becoming a film director. At school, she studied well, and teachers noted her high abilities, but often to achieve the best results, she was prevented by banal laziness and inattentiveness. At the age of 13, Agnès got involved with a bad company, which negatively affected the girl's studies and behavior. She started smoking, and not only regular cigarettes, drinking alcoholic beverages and skipping school. Her parents were not in favor of harsh measures of upbringing and several times tried to simply talk to their daughter, but the conversations did not lead to anything. The girl promised to correct herself and to stop communicating with bad company, but she lied. When she was once again caught smoking and drinking beer right on the territory of the educational institution, the question of her expulsion arose. Her parents realized that if their daughter stayed in Paris, she would continue to socialize with people who had a bad influence on her, and nothing would change. Therefore, Frédéric and Paula decided to transfer Agnès not just to another educational institution, but to send her to another city or even a province, away from the capital's bustle and temptations. A new school. After reviewing several options, Marin's parents opted for a closed private college, Savignol, located in the commune of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, which is in the department of Upper Loire region of Auvergne. It is a prestigious educational institution with almost a century of history. The college was founded in the 30s and worked on the principle of boarding school, where children not only studied, but also lived. However, by the end of the 2000s, the college faced serious financial difficulties and was actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. In a small community, with a population of only 2,500 people, young people increasingly sought to go to study in the capital or a major city, and therefore the local educational institution experienced a shortage of students and, as a consequence, a shortage of finances.
Previously, to get into this college required a high grade point average as well as good characteristics. But even this did not guarantee admission because the competition was several people for one place. However, in 2011, the situation changed dramatically. Due to a large shortage of students, the school, in order not to go completely bankrupt, significantly reduced the requirements for admission, especially if they were children of wealthy parents who were willing to act as sponsors. Despite her behavioral problems, Agnès had a good academic record and grade point average, which allowed her to get into Savenol College, and the authorities simply turned a blind eye to her characteristic. Agnès' parents were happy. They believed that the change would be good for their daughter. She would become more responsible and more easily overcome such a difficult transitional age. Maren was a very sociable, cheerful, and friendly girl. She was able to fit into the new team from the first days. She felt comfortable and quickly made friends. In addition, she showed good progress in her studies, including in new disciplines, which were not available in her previous school in Paris. Her parents visited their daughter at the boarding school every 2 or 3 weeks. They were very pleased with her successes, as well as changes in behavior for the better. Agnès came home to visit only once during her studies. It should be noted that the new school was located on a vast territory surrounded by forest. There were no clear boundaries, fences, and strict security because the crime rate in these parts was considered one of the lowest in the country. To get from the college to the center of the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon required no more than a quarter of an hour on foot, so students after school often went there in groups. But before 5 o'clock in the evening, all had to return back. There were disciplinary penalties for breaking the rules. The disappearance of a student. On November 16, 2011, Agnès, together with some of her classmates, decided to take a walk into town after class. There she met a friend of hers, who studied in another school, but they often crossed paths and constantly called each other. The two girls decided to go shopping and fell behind the general company. A couple hours later, the young people returned to campus, but Maren was not with them. At first, this circumstance did not cause much alarm, and everyone was sure that she would soon return. But the time passed, it began to get dark, and the absence of the student seriously worried the teachers. Her phone was switched off, and she could not be found on campus, so the school management did not hesitate to report the incident to the police. The search began that evening and was conducted by law enforcement officers, teachers, and students of the school. They were divided into groups, each of which combed a different area, but no trace of the missing girl could not be found. No one had seen her and had no idea where she might be.
But everyone hoped that she would return alive and unharmed. Marian's parents were notified almost immediately and asked if their daughter had returned home. Frédéric and Paola were shocked at the news and rushed to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon as fast as they could. They assured them that Agnès could not have run away, for she had no reason to do so and had nowhere to go.
According to them, their daughter liked her new school very much. She had made many friends here. She did not feel any discomfort, and she had no conflicts with anyone. The father and mother of the missing Agnès became actively involved in the search. They talked to their daughter's friends, posted pictures of her all over the city asking for help in finding her, and tried to find any clues or leads. What is Agnès' friend hiding? The first thing the police did was to look for people who were the last people to see the missing Agnès and who might have known about her future plans. Girls from her class said that Maren met a friend of hers in the city and went shopping with her, but no one could give her name. However, soon the law enforcers managed to find Estelle, the same friend from another school. The girl was indeed the last person with whom Agnès had been in contact, so she was considered as a very valuable witness. However, she did not provide any useful information at the first interview. She said that Agnès had helped her choose a birthday present for her father. Then they had a milkshake each and said goodbye. Estelle headed for her home, and Agnès had to return to campus. The girl's story sounded plausible, but her behavior seemed a bit odd. She was visibly nervous and seemed to be holding something back. They decided to talk to her again, and suddenly the story she had told began to take on some details that she wanted to keep quiet. Estelle confessed that Agnes had planned to meet a young man that day, a man she had not told her the name of. Allegedly, it wasn't supposed to be a date, but the guys were going to do something bad, apparently taking illegal substances. A couple hours later, Estelle tried to call Agnes, but she didn't answer, and by evening her phone was turned off. The girl admitted that she lied at the first interrogation because Morin asked her not to tell anyone about the meeting with the mysterious guy, and she promised her that. However, when it became known about the disappearance of Agnes, Estelle decided to confess everything because she suspected that the sudden disappearance could be associated with this young man. It has been suggested that Agnes may have simply run away from college. The girl may have fallen in love and is now spending time with her secret boyfriend. Her phone was last online on campus the day she disappeared, but the device was turned off afterward and it was impossible to locate it. Nevertheless, police officers were able to quickly access all data regarding Agnes's calls and correspondence. It was then that the name of a 17-year-old Mathieu Moulinas, a high school student at the same school as the missing Morin, first came to the attention of the police. The first suspect. It turned out that the missing woman for the last few days corresponded with Mathieu Moulinas, but what could connect her with a 17-year-old young man, what interests they could have in common? In any case, the boy had to be questioned because he could have valuable information and shed light on the case. Nothing concrete or alarming in their correspondence could be found, but on the day of Agnes's disappearance, they were really going to meet on campus and walk together. Mathieu promised to show her something, but did not specify what it was. Moulin was first invited to talk to the police on November 17th. He behaved perfectly calm, but there were strange scratches on his face and hands that looked quite fresh. However, the young man admitted that he was dabbling in illegal substances, and yesterday he specifically overdid it, which caused him to lose consciousness and fell into a thorny bush where he lay for several hours. Classmates and educators confirmed that there were indeed problems with this student. Mathieu was admitted to Savigny College in January 2011. His parents transferred him here to supposedly protect him from bad company and problems. However, the young man even here used alcohol and various illegal substances, which raised the question of his expulsion. But he still felt sorry for him and was given time to improve. Moulinas looked like a typical rebel and troubled teenager. It was as if he challenged those around him with his appearance and behavior. He wore Gothic-style clothes, smoked and drank hot drinks right on the campus. He bragged about his antics to his peers, noting that he would not be punished for it. On the day of Agnes's disappearance, Mathieu disappeared for several hours. Toward evening, he came out of the woods in dirty clothes, with scratched face and hands, and to all questions he answered that he had had too much to drink and was passed out. Naturally, it all looked and sounded suspicious, but so far there was no hard evidence against him, and therefore the investigators decided to take a closer look at him. The spoiled son of rich parents. Mathieu Moulinas was born in December 1993 in the municipality of Neguet-Solorgues in Garda, and was the eldest of 3 children of the couple Sophia and Dominique Moulinas. He grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a fairly well-to-do family, and from childhood was used to having his every whim immediately fulfilled. From an early age, he was observed some strange things. The boy was quite aggressive, irascible, hard to find a common language with peers, and tried to stay apart from other children. In adolescence, the situation worsened. Mathieu had outbursts of rage, he often started fights, began to drink alcohol regularly, and experimented with all sorts of illegal substances. But at the same time, despite his aggression and antisocial behavior, the young man had a very attractive appearance, thanks to which he became popular with the opposite sex. At the time of the described events in his hometown, he had a girlfriend about whom his parents knew and whom he visited on weekends. Mathieu had a number of records with the police, including the theft of prescription drugs from a pharmacy, which he committed with a friend. But the case was hushed up, probably thanks to money from the teenager's parents. He was also able to get into a prestigious private school with a low grade point average and problems with the law because his father offered to sponsor the school when it was in crisis. During interrogations, Molinas behaved defiantly and arrogantly, but remained completely calm so that the police even doubted his involvement in the disappearance of Agnese. The guy was constantly twirling a yo-yo in his hands, his favorite toy, with which he never parted. At the first interrogation, he claimed that he did not know Agnès, but when he was shown a printout of their correspondence, he began to change his testimony, trying to lie on the fly, but quickly became confused in his own words. According to the guy, he promised to show Agnès a clearing in the forest where mushrooms grow. Allegedly, they used them together, and after Mathieu became ill, and he fell into a thorny bush, where he lay until the evening, and when he woke up, he saw that Marin was not. He didn't go looking for her, but just went back to the campus because it was getting dark. A lawyer hired by the parents of the Molinas was present at all the interrogations and recommended that his young ward show the place where he had last seen Agnès and where they, according to him, used mushrooms. However, Mathieu said that he would not be able to find that clearing because they stumbled on it by accident, and he got out of there on autopilot, not really understanding where he is and what is happening around. But Mathieu's words were soon refuted by experts who found no traces of mushroom ingestion in his blood. Moreover, the scratches on his body were recognized as a consequence of a struggle. That is, someone scratched him with nails, and apparently, it was a girl. A gruesome discovery in the thicket. The students of the school who had seen Mathieu coming out of the woods that evening pointed out the direction from which he had appeared, and it was in that part of the woods that it was decided to make a large-scale, thorough search. At that time, there was still a faint hope of finding Marin alive, but on November 18th, searchers awaited a terrible discovery. In a small clearing, hidden in a dense thicket, was found badly mutilated and partially charred body of the missing Agnès. Her clothes were torn, her underwear was missing. There were all the signs of violence, as well as traces of penetrating stab wounds. Doubt that this heinous crime committed by Molinas, no one had no doubt, but it was necessary to wait for the conclusion of forensic experts, as well as to obtain confessions from the killer himself. Actually, when Mathieu was told about the terrible discovery, he did not particularly repudiate and began to testify, telling how everything was. Confessions of a ruthless killer. The strangler confessed that he deliberately lured Agnès into the woods to abuse her, but allegedly did not plan to kill her. However, she put up fierce resistance, scratched him, so he had to tie up the victim using the rope from his favorite toy, yo-yo, which he carried with him everywhere. Agnès screamed and threatened to turn him into the police, which pissed the guy off. Going to prison he did not want to, and therefore decided to kill the unfortunate and get rid of the body. Mathieu brutally beat Agnès, breaking her arm, nose, several ribs, and shin, and then gave her 17 stab wounds, most of which came to the neck, face, and chest. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, he doused her with a flammable mixture from a canister and set her on fire, hoping that the fire would completely destroy the body. Then he quickly left, because it started to get dark, and he did not see that the fire was soon extinguished. He took his toy off the dead body and took it with him. The high school student told about the incident calmly and in detail, as if savoring every word and watching the reaction of the detectives. He felt no remorse or pity for the victim. The examination confirmed that under the fingernails of Agnès were particles of skin and epithelium Mathieu, and in her body revealed traces of biological fluid of the rapist. Also on the rope of the very toy yo-yo found sweat traces of both the perpetrator and the victim.
After all the necessary studies and medical conclusions, Agnès' body was given to her parents, who buried their only daughter in Paris. It is noteworthy that the funeral took place on November 26, 2011, on her birthday. The first victim of a young psychopath. When law enforcers thoroughly took up the biography of Moulinas, they were shocked by the fact that Marin was not his first victim, but this information was carefully tried to hide. As it turned out, he had been cruel to others since childhood, bullying animals, other children, and even his own sisters. He always took an incomparable pleasure in hurting others and watching them suffer. In August 2010, Mathieu attacked his young neighbor Julia, with whom he knew since childhood. The girl showed interest in the handsome neighbor, and he decided to take advantage of it. The guy lured her into the woods, where he hit her on the head, and while the victim was disoriented, tied her up with Scotch tape taken from the house, and then abused the unfortunate. Moulinas then began to strangle her and probably would have killed her, but suddenly her cell phone rang. The perpetrator recoiled, looked around, and simply left the scene. A terrified Julia managed to free herself and called her parents, who immediately reported the incident to the police. Mathieu was arrested the same day. During interrogations, he cried, trying to appease the police, and also made attempts to shift all the blame on the victim, claiming that she herself provoked him, teasing and hinting at intimacy. But law enforcers understood that he had prepared for the crime in advance, and even took duct tape with him to immobilize the victim. Nevertheless, despite the gravity of the crime, Mathieu was not punished. The court took into account the very young age of the perpetrator, and instead of prison sent him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he spent only 4 months. All this time, psychologists and psychiatrists worked with him and evaluated his condition. In December 2010, the chief specialist, who was in charge of Moulinas, gave a conclusion that he was fully rehabilitated, and after the course of therapy, he no longer posed any threat to others. The court, after reading this report, released the offender, requiring him only to attend several anger management sessions. Parental patronage. It is worth noting that the Moulina couple also put a lot of effort into getting their son released. They promised the judge that Mathieu would leave the region and not cause any more trouble, and they also said that they would make sure that the heir would undergo therapy. They hired the best lawyers who did everything possible to keep their client out of jail. After that, the parents started looking for a new school for their son, but since he had a criminal record for such a serious article, they did not want to accept him anywhere. Then the father personally went to the provincial closed college Savinol and made an appointment with the director. He knew about the financial problems of the institution and immediately offered to sponsor him. When it came to the admission of Mathieu to the college, the director noted that the guy is too low academic performance, and the criminal case of a potential student could hit hard on the reputation of the school. But Dominic Moulinas, in every possible way, vindicated his son, lying that there was no violence, just his ex-girlfriend so tried to get back at him after the breakup. Allegedly, that's why he was released a few months later, when everything was sorted out. Surprisingly, but the leadership of the educational institution did not go into the details of the trial and accepted the version told by Dominic. Apparently, the amount of sponsorship he had announced played a decisive role, and they simply turned a blind eye to the crime and withheld this information from other students and their parents. The trial and the verdict. Mathieu had taken Agnès' life only a month before he turned 18. However, he was a minor at the time of the violent and brutal crime, and therefore the law provided for a lighter sentence for such offenders, and the trial itself had to be held in private. Agnès' parents insisted on making the sessions open, at least partially, with the involvement of journalists who would cover the case in the media. However, the Morin couple were refused, and the trial was held behind closed doors.
The proceedings began only on June 18, 2013. The public prosecutor harshly criticized the numerous omissions in the case of Mathieu, in particular, the fact that the psychiatrist who gave the conclusion that the guy is not a threat to others was a young girl who did not have the proper qualifications. She had no previous experience with criminals and made a fatal mistake. The defendant underwent a second psychiatric examination, and experts concluded that not only is he unrepentant, but he may well commit a similar crime again if given the opportunity. Mathieu himself confirmed this, stating that he enjoyed watching the victims suffer. Moulins was diagnosed with symptoms of schizoid and paranoid disorder, which together with outbursts of uncontrolled aggression made him extremely dangerous to others. However, he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible for them before the law. Moreover, the prosecutor insisted that the young man be tried as an adult due to the brutality of his crime, and his request was eventually granted. On June 28, 2013, Mathieu was found guilty of abuse and murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced psychotherapy. He became the second juvenile offender in French history to receive such a harsh punishment. Moulines's lawyers decided to appeal the sentence, but on October 10, 2014, a jury of appeals upheld the life sentence, ending any possibility of a review of the decision. In 2016, Mathieu's parents wrote and published a book in which they described their bitter experience and admitted that their son remains unrepentant.